Well, it is 1300 Mountain Time, 1500 Eastern Time, 1200 Pacific Time. Aviva, it's your time.
11.
I'd just like to welcome everybody to the Board of Operational Government Meteorologist webinar on the Incident Meteorologist program. My name is Darren Clabo. I'm the State Fire Meteorologist for South Dakota and an Incident Meteorologist myself. We have a fantastic panel here today with us. Aviva Braun, Lisa Kriederman, Bob Tobin, and Tony Fuentes. Welcome and thank you all. We will do a quick brief introduction, so I won't introduce you anymore, but I'll go in the order that I have you on my screens. Aviva, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, what made you become an Imet, and your pathway forward?
Hi, everyone. My name is Aviva Braun. I am currently in Anchorage, Alaska. I'm the warning coordination meteorologist at the local office here. Also an Imet, of course. My pathway here. Well, I think one of the questions we might talk about is our educational path. But it was never, fire was never part of that story for me until I entered into the agency. But I have now, since becoming a meteorologist with the National Weather Service, I have worked at a few offices, including the Boise office, where I fell in love with fire meteorology and what IMETs do. And then I worked in Cheyenne, Wyoming, where I learned extreme weather conditions that weren't necessarily fire related, but did include it. And now moved here to Anchorage in June of this last year. So new to this area, still learning this area, but I have to say meteorology is still wonderful and fun wherever you are.
Indeed it is. Lisa, why don't you give yourself an introduction?
Yeah, hi everyone, Lisa Kriederman. I am currently lead meteorologist here at the Portland, Oregon office. I began my meteorology fire weather career back in Tucson, Arizona, where I went to the University of Arizona and got my bachelor's there in atmospheric science. And that's really where I got exposed to fire weather down in the desert. And that's kind of where I grew my love of it. And just being a real outdoorsy person, I loved the idea of really immersing myself in the outdoors. And from the weather service in Tucson, where I started, then I went out to Honolulu, Hawaii, then up to Anchorage, Alaska, then down to Boulder, Colorado for the last 13 years, and now just moved to Portland in June, just like Aviva and I. So it's really been interesting to really see the different climates and how fire responds in each one, and really kind of immersed myself in all things fire. And that is my story.
Thanks, Lisa. It's interesting talking to all the different weather service folks to see where they've bounced all over the place, and you get a nice breadth of experience. So again, thanks for being a panelist. Bob, let's go over to you.
Yeah, thanks. I'm kind of a late bloomer. I didn't go back to school to get my meteorology degree until I was 30, 31, I guess. And all that came about is watching the weather forecast one night on TV and going, God, I could do better than that. My wife goes, prove it, so I did. I haven't bounced around much in the weather service. My first posting was Pendleton and then up here in Spokane over a 28-year career. So I've only been a few places. But I wanted to go to Pendleton because of the fire weather program there. And actually, we weren't an FO yet. We were still an SO, weather service office. So we had a very small staff, but we did have responsibility for fire weather. Seeing as I was one of the only interns there, I got to do it too. So I started in my fire weather career right almost from day one. So been on a lot of fires, even down in Australia, been down there and back. So 28 years, I think I've got 63 or 64 fires in so far in my career. So, and replaced Darren on a fire this year as he was leaving. So
easy to replace. I'm easy to replace. Thanks for coming, Bob. Tony, let's move on to you.
Hey everyone, Tony Fuentes. I'm a lead forecaster in the WFO Reno office. I've been there on coming up on 10 years. I don't know how that all happened that fast, but within the weather service, 14 years. Started off undergrad UW-Madison, Wisconsin there, bounced over to Hawaii, University of Hawaii, Manoa. So I started off really like Aviva, not with fire weather on my mind. It was more of a tropical mindset, and went over and started the weather service in WFO Key West. So it was very different type of a mindset there. But after being out to the West, I really wanted to get out here. I really like the outdoors, as mentioned before, and moving out to Reno, it's just totally ingrained with how things are out here. Fire is a way of life, and it's something that you live with every summer. We're impacted by either not directly by fire, by smoke, especially the past couple of years. It's been pretty bad up here. But just being in the programs, and the program that's really in Reno has been set up for years by some past Imets, Alex Hoon and Jim Wallman. It's just really great to tap into those resources, learned a lot from our office and our past Imets as well. So it's really been a interesting journey so far.
Excellent. And I'm going to come back to this because I'm very curious to hear. And Aviva, you've already answered this a little bit. So let's come back to Tony. Was wildfire meteorology even on your mind as you went through college or your early career? Was it something that you even knew existed?
Yeah, I knew the program, but as I mentioned, I was really focused on tropical meteorology. My research was in hurricanes. I think my first run with fire was something I didn't really expect. I was doing some work in my office when I was in Honolulu at the university there. I walked out, it was at night, and the whole hillside was on fire, which I didn't really cross my mind that wildfire was a thing in Hawaii, thinking of such a tropical environment. And then being down in Florida too, seeing an environment where you wouldn't expect wildfires, and you see fires burning out there, and probably what I wouldn't think of as real fire environments. But just coming out west has really piqued my interest, not just from the fire aspect, but just from the program. I heard such amazing things from Imet, how dedicated this group of meteorologists and forecasters are. So that really got me into it.
Interesting. And Lisa, you said you kind of first got into maybe interested in fire when you were down in Tucson. Talk a little bit about your educational path down there, and then going into the weather service, did you think this was a career field for you?
Yeah, just being down in Tucson, that was, they definitely have a fire season there, but I hadn't entered the weather service until my senior year there at the university. So up until then, I knew it was around, but I didn't really know there was a full-on program in the weather service for fire weather until I became that student volunteer there at the office. And there we had 2 IMETs there, and I started hearing about what they were doing, how, you go away from the office and you're gone for a week or 2 weeks, and you really get in there right with the team and the crews, and you just get super focused. And that is who I am. I love detail. So I loved that I could really focus on one area and know what the end result was. Everyone was working towards the same goal, being a part of that team and knowing exactly the goal of everything. That was definitely what I wanted to do. And so just started progressing towards that. But then when I went to the university, or to Honolulu, Hawaii, like Tony said, there was fire there, but fire season generally occurred with hurricane season. So that was a little hard to get the training, because the staff really wanted us to stay around for the hurricanes. So really I didn't get more involved until I went up to Alaska, which that is a whole nother beast up there, as Aviva will definitely see. So yeah, it was just a really great introduction, and again, to kind of see how fire reacts and how it acts in each environment. And
yeah, I think one of the most interesting things for me personally about being an IMET is this idea that when you get assigned, you have a singular focus. Like your only job is dealing with that fire. And maybe Aviva, can you elaborate a little bit on your perspective? I see you nodding over there on just this idea where you only have one job to do and 24 hours to do it for 14 or more days.
It's actually really fun. You get to forget everything else, like nothing else matters. You get hyper focused on the one area, the one climate, the meteorology that occurs within the area that will affect the fire team. And your thoughts don't stray anywhere else. And so you're able to like really drill into those details and actually learn the land better than even some of the meteorologists at the forecast offices get to know it. And then you have the opportunity to teach if you find the time to, but that interaction with the land, with the team, with the weather in that particular area is just so incredibly interesting. And yeah, you really get to drill down into those details. And so when you are a detail-oriented person, it flows really naturally, and is really fun. Like you really become an expert in that one location.
Absolutely. And it can kind of get confusing too, because you have to learn the new geography and the new lingo of the place that you're at on each new assignment. And Bob, you've been on 63 different assignments. Can you elaborate a little bit on that same topic?
Well, yeah, the climates are so different everywhere you go, from the California coast to the Oregon coast, to small little dry, almost high desert areas in Central Oregon. You know, and a lot of times you could go from being a micro forecaster to being a very large scale forecast when you have fires like the Rubber Biscuit down in Southwest Oregon many years ago that grew to 900,000 acres in a couple of weeks. So it changes a lot and every day. That's what makes it more fun than anything, is going through those changes, seeing what's going to happen, and then be able to forecast it hopefully correctly.
Yeah, and building the relationships while you're there too. You know, a lot of these times you'll be working with teams that you've been worked with before, and working with people that you've worked with before. It's almost becomes like a family. Tony, do you have a lot of wildland fire family across the nation?
I'm going on my 5th season here, so I'm just starting to work with a lot of these different teams and starting to see them on different incidents as well. So it's good to see some familiar faces out there. And I think going in and having someone work with you in the past, and you know, you've built some trust in the past incidents, I think that's helpful for both sides of the equation here, where you can go in, feel a little bit more confident that they've seen what you've done before, and then you know how they operate and get a little better sense of what they like to see. And so I think overall that's really helpful for me from the standpoint of being able to know what teams are really looking for, and how they address handling any given incident.
Sure, and I should take a step back just for a second for the non-fire leaning folks here. So incident meteorologists work for the broad organization that is an incident management team. They work in the planning section of that incident management team, who then it's the whole organization's led by an incident commander. And each team might have a little bit of a different personality, and you have to kind of start to get to know what the personality is of the team and how to talk with people. Tony, what are some of your experiences with the different teams that you've worked with, and how you have to gear your forecast specifically for that group of people? Or don't you change how you forecast with respect to the teams that you work with?
Yeah, I think what adjustments I would make, I try not to really stray too much from, I guess, what's typical. I know some teams, we do produce some fire weather products while we're out there. We do a kind of a threat matrix based on given weather scenarios out there. I've noticed some certain teams like certain formats of stuff. I remember on one training fire, we did a kind of devised a matrix that looked like it was a little bit more easier for the team to digest, at least in our minds. To them, it was totally foreign, so they didn't like it. So we went back to what they're used to as well. So I think you just kind of learn to tailor what they need and what they want, and what they want out of planning meetings, concise, more detailed. It all just kind of depends on who you're working with. And I think you really have to be proactive with asking questions, saying what they want, and getting that out of them.
Sure, and it's hard to do because you only have a very limited amount of time to do it in, and so that first 24 to 72 hours, I think, on an assignment are the most important. Lisa, we'll go back to you. What are the things that you're thinking about first when you get assigned to an incident? When you first arrive, besides checking in and all that, like operationally, what are the first things that you're doing?
Really, it's just to make those initial contacts with, you know, who is who, So you know who to go to, obviously. And then also kind of get the flow that Tony was talking about, the flow that they do things, the schedule that they do things. I've already talked to the local weather service office to talk to them about if they know of any particular weather pattern that is, you know, more high danger for fire. I already have the forecast in mind, because a lot of times you go on scene and you're asked questions immediately about the forecast and what's coming up. So that's always important to have as you get on to scene. But really, it's just to meet all your contacts, all of the incident management team, who you're going to, really setting up a spot for yourself if you can, and then just dive right in, so you can help them as quick as possible. Because really, if you're the first one in, like you're not relieving anybody, it's really, the fire is usually going pretty big at that point. So you just got to be, you know, hit the street running. So.
No, absolutely. And Bob, you work with pretty much the same team these days, year after year. Am I correct in asking that or saying that?
Yes, I do now. I'm retired from the weather service, so I am working with one team. But to get back to what Lisa was saying, you know, some of the transitions are the toughest. You know, in the Pacific Northwest, where I worked mostly, I got to know most of the people up here, and it was easy going into the fight. It made it easier, I should say, going into it. But going over to, say, Montana or Idaho or down into Utah and those places, you're working with all brand new people. So you got to try to find out where their strength is, what they are looking for, so that you can communicate to that, to what their needs are. And, you know, sometimes that takes a couple of days. Some of the biggest transition issues that I've had is transitioning between, like, say, a type 2 team and a type 1 team, which they're going to have totally different ideas of what they want in a forecast. And, you know, again, you're going through a transition where it might take a couple of more days to figure out exactly what they want. And then to maybe transition back to a type 2 team, you know, later on in a couple of weeks later, you know, it makes it, it can make it tough trying to get everybody the communication right on those.
No, absolutely. And I tell you what, like Bob mentioned earlier, he transitioned after me, and that was a fun transition, even though the whole COVID umbrella was hanging, COVID dark cloud was hanging over our heads. So like we've covered the first, I don't know, 24, 48 hours of an assignment. What are some of those things that start to linger on as you get closer to 1 week or 2 weeks into an assignment? What kind of stresses are involved with that type of thing? Aviva, maybe you want to start with that?
Stressors as we go in. Yeah, I mean, that if you're a week in, the adrenaline has started to wane a little bit, and the extreme tired feeling sets in, and you realize how unhealthy you've been with, like, being fed whatever the food is at camp, and you know, 4 or 5 hours of sleep that you're able to get, especially if it's an active fire. 4 or 5 hours, you're lucky. Some of those things start to set in, and you realize, you know, I'm kind of running on fumes, but I just need to keep on going. By this point, though, like, you've made a relationship with the people that you report to. You have friends that you've made your fire family in the area, and laughter really seems to help. The other part is that if it is a really active fire, it can get pretty, you know, difficult. Your days will be long. You have to make some really crucial forecast decisions that will affect communities. I mean, that is definitely a major stressor. And kind of getting back to that last question, I was transitioning from a type 2 Pacific Northwest team to a Rocky Mountain type 1 team as the Cameron Peak fire blew up. And I actually already had a relationship with that Rocky Mountain team, and it was really crucial that they already, like, knew me and trusted me, because I was predicting crazy winds. And they just came in, they were like, okay, Aviva, you said that's true. Okay, like we're pulling you into the evacuation meeting. We're like, what's the weather you're thinking? And they took everything that I said word for word. Like, I already had that relationship, and I mean, communities lost homes, but nobody was hurt, and all the firefighters were out of the way before I made a 17-mile run. So relationships are incredibly crucial. They will feed you during the fire. They will help you get through. They'll help you with laughter. But yeah, those stressors are definitely there.
And Aviva, I'll give you some compliments. I did hear of some great forecasting stories from when you were on that fire. I was on the Cameron Peak when it first started, so you can blame me for giving it the ability for 2 months later after two 2-foot snowfall events to blow up.
Well, that was not your fault. The winds came in and got all the snow, got rid of all the snow. It sublimated like that, like multiple times. That fire just came and waned and came. And anyway, I don't accept any blame for that.
So that's an interesting segue. Yeah, at the same time that the Cameron Peak fire was blown up last year, we also had the Mullen fire on the Wyoming-Colorado border and the East Troublesome fire, all cooking at the same time. Tony, have you ever been on an assignment where you have multiple large fires within the same area and where you're actually coordinating with the other IMETs on those fires?
Yeah, back in my first season certified as an IMET 2020, that monster season we had there, we had all sorts of fires in all over the Sierra. I was part of the North Complex fire when it made its gigantic run. It was 200,000 acres practically overnight. It was pretty massive. We had to zone that fire out there's multiple teams working on it. There's another IMET on the other side. So you're not only working with the local office there, but coordinating with the other IMET on that. We did have large fires within the state as well nearby. I believe the August Complex was going on. There's Butte as well. So there's a lot of IMETs kind of within your region there with a very similar impact. So I think we hop on coordination calls or just chat with each other, kind of get the forecast thinking in line, what we're all kind of concerned with the upcoming days there. So especially these days with COVID, I think it really accelerated the ability to coordinate with each other, whether it's video chat, Zoom, like we're doing now. It really kind of helps out, not just talking, but seeing a face and chatting one-on-one too. I think that really helps. So there's quite a bit of coordination that was ongoing then.
No, absolutely. And I know the Pacific Northwest, at least from the times I've been up there, has done in my opinion, has done an especially good job of coordinating between all of the different IMETs, predictive services, and all the different weather service offices. Bob, with your vast experience up there, can you touch on that at all in terms of, I'll just call it intermeteorological support?
Yeah, it's great up here. I mean, that's something that we've done always. I go into a fire thinking that I've got the whole weather service standing right behind me when I do stuff, and and then coordinating with the other IMETs in the field, because there's almost always somebody will say, "Well, did you look at this?" And it's like, "No, I never thought of that." And it's something that is probably key and is going to help you out, and that happens all the time. That saved my bacon a lot. But and even at night, you got to sleep sometime. And if you have thunderstorms forecasted at night, the local offices will give you a heads up, call you in your tent, and then you're up at 2 o'clock in the morning, chasing thunderstorms. So that coordination is key, and it works very well. Works so well that, a lot of times there's some wagers between the IMETs of just exactly what time that lightning strike's going to hit your fire area, or exactly when that rain's going to hit, so that makes it kind of fun, but the coordination is real. Yeah, it's really good up here. We appreciate it.
Yeah, I would imagine so. And, we're building great relationships here in the Rocky Mountain region as well. And Lisa, just because I had the opportunity to meet your family a few years ago in Bend, how do you deal with the stresses of being on a fire and being away from a family, and that aspect of it? Because we're all humans with lives outside of fires as well.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely a stressful situation. However, just with my family already knows how much this part of my job means to me. I'm sure a lot of IMETs feel the same way, where it's like your most favorite part of your weather service or whatever career, that there is a little give and take, but it can get very intense. In 2012, when I was on the Waldo Canyon fire, and when that blew into Colorado Springs at the same time, right up the road in Boulder, there was another fire that was about to make my family evacuate. And so that was a lot of stress. But everyone knew that was happening. So the fire team knew, they were saying, hey, if you need some support if you need to be relieved, what do you need? But I knew that they were going to be okay. And I was in contact, and thankfully, for technology that we can stay in contact with our family. I think it would be a different thing if we didn't have the ability to call or text or anything and make sure everything's okay. But I really like also the fact of the Imet community, and the coordinator, Larry Van Bussum, he's very supportive of, if family will always come first. And if you're just not comfortable with something, that's okay. With this job, it is our passion, but, we still have our families. And so it's really kind of like a family friendly part of the job that it seems like everyone knows. And how Bob was saying, like, the support that we all give each other too. I don't think I could do this job being an Imet if I didn't have all the other Imets around me, helping to support, helping, understanding what you're going through. Because you come from a weather service office where you have all these other people you can talk to about your decisions, make sure you're kind of making the right one, make sure you're not missing something. And then you go out to a fire and you're it. But luckily with all the Imets, like, everyone is very supportive. They're helpful. You can ask anybody anything at any time of the night. And you also have all the local weather service offices too, that they've been great. They'll help you. They know that you're out there on your own and help you with any sort of the questions. So overall, it is stressful, but when it means, so much, then you just make it work.
Yeah, and you tend to lean heavily on those around you. I had a planning section chief several years ago tell me that this field, firefighting in general, will swallow families or chew them and spit them out. And it's tough because you are away all the time. I have one son, and I found out my wife was pregnant while assigned on a fire. He started walking while I was assigned on a fire. It was, it's that kind of a deal, and it's something that you have to think about if this is a field that you really want to get into, because it is difficult, and you want to make sure that you have a good relationship with your family and you can trust everyone around you. And Lisa, during that, your answer to my question there, you talked a lot about networking, you talked a lot about communication. What skills, and Tony, I'll throw this question to you first. What skills do you use the most as an Imet that are not necessarily related to meteorology?
Yeah, I'd say the big one for me, which you learn right off the bat, is communication and the different styles you need to use depending on your audience. I think that's one of the first things just kind of learn. I think overall, we're trying to give information to people for whatever decisions or plans we're trying to use. So whether you're talking to elected officials, the public, the incident management team you're working for, I think they all need like a different style of communicating to get the message across, to get the information they want, or maybe draw it out of them if they're not sure, or maybe even like comforting tone if you're doing a community meeting. I think for me, I just really try to think about how I address whatever topics at hand. And I think that's the thing for me, which is probably the biggest challenge, where I've probably seen the most growth when it comes to being Imet within the first year to now. I think that's, for me, what stands out. Although, communication obviously is important what we do day to day, I think it's at a different level there.
Have you had any mentors that have really helped you develop as an Imet through your career?
Yeah, either when you start off with your dedicated trainer there, I did have the benefit of having a similar trainer just by random chance on my two training fires, but Jeff Tonkin there. I think a thing that really helped me, I believe, is our local office in Reno. There was a stage where two of us were coming in, two were transitioning out. So we actually had 4 active Imets for a season there. So it was just incredibly helpful to be able to lean on these guys who have been, we had an ace and a double ace Imet, 25 and 50 missions, and some newcomers. So just be able to have different perspectives, not just from veterans, but also another person coming up as a trainee with me. So you get different sides of that just locally, and just shoot them a text. They've been through some high impact fire incidents before, and I found myself on one of my first season right off the bat. So to be able to talk to someone who's been there before is incredibly helpful. And even after the fact too, just to kind of unload a little bit of what happened and process all this. So it's very, very valuable, very helpful.
Interesting, it is. And Bob, between working in the United States and working in Australia, what types of skills have you found to be most helpful outside of, your undergraduate education in meteorology?
Well, Tony hit the nail on the head with that communication and being adaptable from one group to another. I mean, you can get some people that are very highly educated in weather, and you can use a lot of the technical terms and drill down deeper into the forecast, and they'll understand that. And then 10 minutes later, you might be in a public meeting where they're not going to understand anything but clouds and it's going to rain type stuff. So you need to be adaptable that way. Working in Australia, I was working with the Bureau of Meteorology, and I was working with the fire community there too. And the people that were asking questions there, although they did have an accent, it wasn't that bad. You could figure out pretty quickly what they were looking at. The questions there were not any different than what we saw here. So that made it a lot easier. But yeah, Tony hit it really good. The communication is the key. Trying to get what you know about the weather in the area into these people's heads so that they're going to make a good decision on what they're going to do tactically.
Both of you bring up a great point. As Imets, we don't just put forecasts in front of firefighters. We forecast for many, many, many different functional groups. I've done many public information meetings, many lawmaker meetings. If you have a high wind event, all of a sudden now you have to talk to your facilities and logistics folks to make sure everything's battened down appropriately. Aviva, I see you nodding your head. What are some of your experiences working with maybe the non-firefighting groups that you have to work with in the Imet community?
I was actually like, all of these questions are like kind of combining for me as we speak, because, okay, so Tony and Bob spoke to two of the most used skills, adaptation and communication, incredibly important. But the other one that I've been thinking about is empathy and humility. And that's because of the situations I've been put into I think most of us have been put into situations where we've done public meetings and we're speaking to the public who has been affected by something drastic and life altering, and you have to be aware that there's so many feelings going on as you're speaking, and you have to be aware of those feelings and like stay in your lane, but like also communicate in a way that they can't be triggered by anything. And last season, 2020, I actually I had this it was a really odd experience of staying in a hotel with evacuees, and I'd come back off of I'd be off duty, but then be riding an elevator or eating breakfast as these evacuees are also there, and they're saying, hey, is my home going to make it through the night? And it's like, okay, but how do I address this and be realistic at the same time, but also knowing that they're about to lose everything, like memories, whatever, like family heirlooms, things that really matter to them. And so that was humbling, responding to them in a way where they felt like they could still come to me if they needed to for weather information, but also being like, I don't know, like there's so many factors that come into these sorts of things. But wrapping back in, and I don't know if you guys noticed, but I kind of, Lisa, while you were speaking about like our fire family, I got a little teary-eyed there. I figured out last season that I actually do have a little PTSD from one of my training fires, and my mentor from that training fire is on, has already chatted. But I was on the campfire, this really big fire, and I was so like in a box, like thinking just about what I needed to do, that I didn't let anything affect me, or wasn't letting anything affect me. And then people from my fire family from the Imet program started calling and being like, hey, are you okay? Let me check in. And they've been doing that ever since, like over the years, people still check in on me. That fire family is so important. Anyway, that's going back to the stressors. There are some real world stressors that come out of these types of things.
There are absolutely, and I'm taking a straw poll here, but how many of you guys have spoke at a public meeting and someone's wanted to or has given you a hug after the end of the meeting? Some member of the public, right? You're doing a public service, and I do know the public really appreciates it. And so there's definitely the human aspect of it outside of the nerdy science forecasting side of it. And for me, at least, that's the most rewarding part of it, is understanding that you are doing a public good, and there's a lot of reward in that. So I'm going to transition a little bit from that, but how many of you guys have ever busted a forecast while being an incident meteorologist? And if you're willing, Tony, are you willing to tell us what it was and how bad it was?
Yeah, well, I've been lucky in the sense I haven't had a big bust or is like totally whiffed it yet. Maybe I just haven't been in long enough, but I'm sure I can look forward to that down the road. But definitely, we have wind forecasts, and maybe lucky they busted in the side where it's, it doesn't really bother people too much. Maybe the winds didn't surface as much as you would say. So they're like, we're okay with this. But kind of on that long aspect, I think too, when you have forecasts that you kind of have to stand by and you believe in. I remember one case where there was a decision whether or not to put convection in the storm or thunderstorm activity into the forecast, and felt pretty good that it wasn't going to be an issue, that all the moisture was going to drift off. But as you're there briefing, and you're kind of briefing weather savvy people, firemen and the team as well, and you see above you all this castellanus above you, instability aloft. But for me, from their aspects, like, it's unstable. Are you sure you're not going to get thunderstorms? But for me, I knew that was all going to drift off. It's all moving away from the area. So it kind of had some second guess questions there, backhand, but you feel good. So I think there is a confidence factor that goes into it. But I know it'll come at some point, but nothing, luckily at this point, I haven't had any major bust.
And Bob, I know right before we actually started the public portion of this discussion, you were talking about a particular forecast bust there was when you were working on a fire on the Washington-Oregon border.
Yeah, I've actually had bigger busts than that, though. It's easy to bust. Yeah, it's easy to. I mean, on one it was 2020, yeah, and we were on the west slopes of the southwest slopes of the Cascades, close to the gorge, and we had a rain event coming, and I said on one end of the fire we're going to see between 3/4 of an inch and an inch, and the other side we're going to see about an inch or an inch and a quarter. On the west end of the fire, we got 3.5 inches. And while we were driving out of town because the fire was out, it was still raining. And on the other side of the fire, they only got about 1/2 inch. So that was a total bust, but it wasn't bad. It went, we got the rain. It was just, I just way under forecasted it. And I consider that a bust. But just this last year in the Colville Indian Nation, I had a wind bust that, and it was a lot of terrain, but southwest winds, and it came up one valley out of the southeast and pretty strong. And looking back at it, there was a little meso low that set up over by the Omak area, the Tenasket Valley, that really enhanced that. And the winds were ripping, and we weren't expecting it, and we lost 25,000 acres that day. And the team was coming at me, and you could tell they were not happy with that, but they, a lot of people rallied around too and supported you, but they're like, because of your wind, we lost 25,000 acres, or because you're busted forecast. And I'm like, you would have lost it anyway. The winds were still there, so, but yeah, you bust forecasted, and then you have to stand up in front of the crowd and explain to them, how you busted it. And, we're going to hitch up our pants and we're going to do it again tomorrow. Let's go, so that's what it is to be an Imet, though.
And I think reestablishing that trust is really important in the field, acknowledging the fact that, yeah, maybe you made a mistake, maybe Mother Nature threw a wrench at you, but I think reestablishing that trust is incredibly important. Viva or Lisa or any of you, do you have any comments on just how can you reestablish trust after a busted forecast?
I'll go first. I mean, yeah, like you said, Darren, if you really put in that effort and you figure out, what went wrong, or, why what happened, then they are more willing to listen to you, or put that trust back into you. But overall, like, my experience has been most of the fire community, they understand that weather is just crazy. I mean, with complex terrain, that's why they call it complex. It's just so crazy, and what it does to winds, any of that, they are understanding. And especially if you can give some of those probabilistic parts of the forecast, then they will have a better idea and kind of have different game plans on those levels. So in my experience, I haven't had anybody that just totally lost it on me and just, you know, I never could regain that trust or anything. So really it's the fire community really understands how complex it can be. And so they do know that you have the experience and the knowledge, but they are understanding that it's tough.
Sure. Aviva, Tony, do you guys have any comments on that same topic?
Lisa just said everything I was going to say, is establishing why you busted, why you think you busted, communicating that, and working on those relationships afterwards. But yeah, speaking in probabilistic terms really does help. But yeah, I don't have much else to contribute from what Lisa just said. I do the exact same thing.
No, that's all right. Tony, any other thoughts, or Bob?
I think it's also really valuable to let the team know too. I think you're coming at this not just me forecasting. It's a real group effort. The fact that you're doing a lot of coordination with the local offices, and they ask about that a lot too. In my experience, that are you coordinating with this with other offices, Imets, and the GACs as well. So the fact that you're kind of having this team effort, you're bouncing off a lot of other people as well. I think it becomes a lot more understanding to them that you know, it just kind of might have slipped through everyone's mind, or just it's just challenging and maybe not at the limit of forecasting ability if you're kind of looking at a really small scale as well.
Sure.
I was actually just thinking that the one time I have been yelled at was by a non-incident management team member. And Darren, you were part of the group that helped me deal with that. But yeah, incident management team members are really kind and on your side. And when, are you guys still there? Okay.
Yep.
When that person left, I mean, the team kind of came around me and just said, "We support you. What do you want to do next?" So teams understand everything, and as long as we're communicating, I don't think that we can go wrong.
It's a fun community to work with, the incident management team as well as the firefighters, because there is such an extreme breadth of expertise and knowledge. You have all of these people that come from the EMS world, from, you know, the firefighting backgrounds to, you know, people that work at the front desk out of a National Forest Service supervisor's building. I mean, it's just, it's incredible, the amount of knowledge that are out there. And I think we'll touch on one last topic before we close for questions, but incident meteorologists don't just do wildfire. They are trained in all hazards. And I'll leave it open to the group. Maybe we'll start with Bob. What are some non-wildfire assignments that you've been on, if you have been on any?
I did a COVID thing this last April, but it didn't have anything to do with meteorology. They just needed some bodies to work and help people out. So I did some of that. I got called up by Larry Van Bussum from Boise to go to Hurricane Katrina, but they wanted me out that night and they couldn't get a hold of my boss to give me permission to go. So I never made it, but that would have been one that the Weather Service actually supported that for quite some time and had quite a few IMETs down in that area.
Sure. Lisa?
Yeah, so back in 2013, for those of you near or around the Front Range of the Rocky Mountains, we had quite a bit of waterfall, pretty bad floods back then. So there's the 2013 Colorado floods, but yeah, there was some flooding up in Aviva's neck of the woods and Cheyenne and down in Pueblo's area, just some ridiculous amount of rainfall. So I was dispatched there to help with the search and rescue after that. So, you know, it was really, I think, kind of like the 5th or 6th day of pretty heavy rains, but a lot of the mountain roads were washed out, so they needed to take helicopters in to try to get the people out of there. So really it was more of an aviation forecasting assignment. So really just getting those ceiling heights, the visibility, also winds as well, to let them know if they could fly or not. And then of course, watching for those thunderstorms, as those don't work with helicopters either. So it was very similar, and I was working with an incident management team, but it was very focused on aviation forecasting.
Sure. Aviva or Tony, do you have any experiences you'd like to share that are non-fire related?
In Cheyenne, we staff the Cheyenne Frontier Days for a whole week every single summer. And it happens to fall in the climatological peak of severe weather season. So we do deploy every single year because there are a lot of people who could get hurt and not too many shelters available to people who attend the Frontier Days. And actually my first year doing that, on one of my first deployments, we actually had a tornado warning for the park. And actually that was the day I realized that I could do the incident meteorology thing, because I knew I could stay focused under pressure. That was something, an experience I'm really glad I had.
And for the folks on here that don't know what that is, I believe it's the largest rodeo in the United States.
Largest rodeo in the United States.
And I haven't been there, but I've driven past the facilities, and it looks like a big party.
It's a wild house.
What about you, Tony? Any other non-fire experiences?
I have been all fire at this point, but just hearing from other people's experience, I would love to experience some other type of event, whether it's tropical or any type of other event like that, or even, Bob, even though it's still fire related, like get down to Australia. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I'd have to use a mirror though to look at any surfaced weather maps so I knew what was going on.
It's not that bad. It really isn't. You just got to orient yourself, and it's not that bad. It
You
really
just kind of
isn't.
go up. Yeah, you just kind of go upside down and you flip yourself around, and then.
Right.
Yeah. South is cold and north is warm.
I do know my very first assignment was actually the Southeastern South Dakota Missouri River flooding, and I ended up being more of a hydrologist for a couple of weeks than anything else. And that was interesting because I really had to think back and leverage all of the networks that I had made in kind of the water world. And so it wasn't really weather related. It was trying to think of, okay, who are all the USGS people I've ever met, kind of a thing. So yeah, you really leverage those networks that you end up building through your career. So at this point, I guess I'm going to go back into the chat and just review if there are any questions. Feel free just to type them in the chat, or maybe just put a space holder in the chat and I can call on you individually. And I know that right as we got started, Anthony Mondero had a really good question. Anthony, would you be willing to unmute yourself and ask that question once again?
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I'm a cooperative weather observer for the National Weather Service out of Harris, New Jersey. My supervising office is in Upton, New York. And I just had a question with the forest fires that we do get in central and southern New Jersey and sometimes northwest Jersey. Are there local offices assigned or have IMETs, say, back east here on the eastern seaboard?
And I'll let maybe Lisa, do you want to try tackling that question?
It was a little fuzzy, but I heard, is there IMETs at every office? Is that what the question was?
Moral of the story is that, yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of the weather service IMETs, who are actually weather service employees, every office doesn't have one. It depends on if there's interest there, and then they need to get trained up and be supplied basically a computer kit, a laptop and such. So you need that interest first. So not every office has one or is, mandated to have one. And then some offices like Tony was at in Reno had 4, and Portland, my office had 3 last year. So it depends. Most IMETs are kind of, you'll find more IMETs in the West, just mainly due to the area of where wildfires happen most often. But there's definitely some IMETs out east and in the south, Anchorage, Honolulu. But yeah, not every office has them.
And then follow up, Lisa, how would incident support then be handled? Say if a request came in by an Office of Emergency Management, County OEM coordinator, or out west, you guys may refer to them as the EMA.
Well, with that, you need to, basically, we are coordinated through kind of the dispatches, the local dispatch, which may coordinate or may not coordinate with the local GACs, the Geographic Area Coordination Centers. And then our coordinator, the Weather Service IMET coordinator, he'll figure out who might be closest by, because we want to kind of get there. And it's good to have local knowledge, but if none of the local IMETs are around, he'll start searching all those other IMETs who are available during that time frame.
And that request is made through the FO, Lisa, or through the region?
No, it's through like the incident management teams, and then that goes to the local dispatch office, and then through the GAC there.
Thank you. Very well done. Great presentation.
Just one other thing on that, though. I mean, if you open up an emergency operations center, we have people in the weather service offices that are trained up to go to those places and spend, several days or even several weeks at times without calling in an IMET per se. The warning coordination meteorologist and several other forecasters are trained up to do that kind of thing. As a matter of fact, that's what the warning coordination management person, that's his main focus, is to take care of the warning, the warning coordinator, or the warning people, by county or by state. So there are people in there without bringing in an IMET as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Bob, and well done this afternoon.
If I may add, we have a program in the Weather Service that kind of tags onto what Bob and Lisa are saying, but we have a program that's based off of the incident management, or the incident meteorologist position. It's called deployment ready status. That it's a task book that meteorologists within the Weather Service can work through, where if it's a hyperlocal, if you set up EOC, for instance, you can ask somebody with deployment ready status to be deployed to your incident. And that is why that task book is there, and why that program has been set up for those local needs that not necessarily are fire and need a person there dedicated for 2 weeks at a time, but maybe a day or two, but they can actually go for multiple weeks, like Bob said.
Awesome. Thank you.
We have a question from Tyler Miller. She says, speaking of high winds, can one of the presenters speak to the danger high winds pose to aerial operations? And have you ever had the urge that operations be shut down, specifically relating to air operations? Tony, what's been your experience working and forecasting for the air operations?
Yeah, I think air operations, it's pretty common to have winds impact their operations, especially with something like helicopters. I think their threshold is not too high for what they can operate in. So winds are frequently an issue for them. And not just winds, as a matter of fact, smoke is a huge issue. Their visibility really restrict what they can do on a day-to-day basis, which is very common, being on a wildfire, having smoke in the area. So it's pretty commonplace for it to impact their operations. And I think any given incident, I think a lot of the teams have the mindset of, it's nice to have, air support, but, don't count on it.
Aviva, Lisa, or Bob, you have any other comments about air operations and possibly shutting down those?
Well, it's for air operations, a lot of times with rotor rings, hail is a bigger trigger than anything else, because those helicopters don't handle that very well at all. It throws them up and they want to run away or hide someplace. So a hail forecast a lot of times is more important than the wind forecast, because they have a criteria. Once, if you say the winds are going to be X speed and their criteria is, less than that, then they'll fly until those winds get up to that point, and then they're going to want to find a place to hide. But in my career, I have shut down several fires. Just nobody leaves camp because of what the weather is going to do today, and those are very bad days as far as fire behavior went. I saw It was a cold front and very unstable atmosphere. The fire ran 10 miles through tall timber, had a plume that went to 42,000 feet. It was spotting out ahead of it. We hit it, that was over in Montana, and they just said, nobody leaves camp today. That's it. You can watch from here and you can see it very well from camp. So yeah, you have that power in you if you do it. You got to be sure of what you're saying, because that's cost them a lot of money to sit up a whole bunch of people for a whole day. So.
And it's not just a safety issue, it's also an effectiveness issue, especially when it comes to fixed wing aircraft. If you're trying to drop retardant and the winds are too strong, you're getting too much drift and you're not effectively meeting your objectives. And so a lot of that comes into play too. It's not just about safety to man or machine. It's really is the tool the right tool to be using on that particular day. Gordon Brooks, hi Gordon, good to see you're on. Gordon asks, so there has been a trend towards supplying probabilistic Met forecast info, and Aviva, I'll point you to this question just because I think you were the one that was talking about it a little bit during one of your discussions.
Yeah, actually probabilistic forecasting is exactly what we ended up using in this one time that I did get yelled at on a fire. There's a tool that, well, actually the weather, so let me start here. The Weather Service is slowly moving in the direction of speaking in more probabilistic terms with our core partners, because our core partners need to know what are the high ends, what are the low ends, so that they can really plan for all situations within the sphere of what actually could occur. And in this one instance on this one fire, we had one partner speaking to the highest probabilistic forecast, and some of the Imets on the fires that we had in northern Colorado speaking to some of the lower probabilistic terms. And so the way that we fixed it was to just present, here are all of the options that could occur. We're going to state this plainly so that people can understand where we're at and why we're forecasting the way that we are. But there is a tool that has been incredibly useful. I'm sure every single Imet uses it. It's the NBM 1D viewer. Basically, you can drop a pinpoint anywhere in the United States and get a probability from that. NBM is a national blend of models. It's every single model blended together. So you are going to capture everything. Sorry, I think I keep on trying to lose my power here, but yeah, the NBM captures everything that could possibly happen, and so you can speak with more conviction when you have that supporting you.
And talking in probabilistic terms isn't necessarily the firefighters' favorite things, but because we have to convey there's a certain amount of uncertainty in the forecast to begin with, and we're talking about what are the most favorable outcomes, what are the most possible outcomes. But sometimes you still have to caveat that with, hey, if we get some mid-level alto stratus today, our temperatures aren't going to be nearly as high, the wind's not going to be as strong, and our RH isn't going to bottom out. And so I like to talk in probabilistic terms, but while still giving kind of clear text on the caveats that go into those things.
Yeah, and it's really about knowing what that core partner needs and what they're after.
And that's exactly it.
Sure. And one of the things why probabilistic forecasting works to the extent that it does is that we're talking about this maybe 5-6 days out in advance of what the incoming inclement weather you're talking about. You might start off saying that there's only a 20% chance of this and then build up, or just say it's not going to happen at all. But that's one of the key things about having an Imet on the fire working with the team, is that you're building this up over a 5, 6, maybe 7 day, unless it happens the next day when you get onto a fire. You're building that up over a period of time so that they're understanding that this is what could happen. It could be this or it could be this. So that longevity of it makes it work a lot better too.
And so I know it's the top of the hour, but there's at least one more question that I see in the chat, and I'm happy to hang out for at least another hour if I need to. I'm not saying we will, but Woodrow asks, I'm a relatively new meteorologist at the Duluth office who has an interest in becoming an Imet in the future, with communication being such an important part. Are there any suggestions for things I could do to help enhance my communication skills? Tony, I'm going to direct this one to you. What are some ways that we can think about improving our communication skills as we go through our jobs?
Yeah, I'd say, well, for me, in my experience, I think doing rather than just kind of, I think you can kind of research maybe a little bit about, communication styles. But for me, I got the most out of just doing it. If you're kind of new into the field, take advantage of those opportunities to do outreach in your area. Just have the experience talking in front of groups, getting more comfortable with that. And there's a certain aspect of engaging with people, having a storytelling element of it, where you can really capture people's attention so you can get the message across to them. So I think in my experience, just having experience doing it repetitively and just going back and kind of reviewing how you did with that, and just kind of learning and making adjustments as you go, speaking with people, trying to be a little bit more proactive with getting what they need. It kind of helps you out to tailor the message too. And, I think some of our training that we got as Imet too is, not just what you do day to day, but kind of like in those in-between times, if you're going to get lunch or dinner, or maybe sit down and just start engaging with people who've been out there in the field, gather intel, see what their day's like, and, building relationships. I think that just really helps build trust and helps your communication as well. Just not just speaking, but interacting offsite or off the time where you're up there presenting.
Absolutely. Lisa, do you have any thoughts on improving skills in communication?
There's a couple good online classes, both through the Weather Service, and I'm sure there's some in other areas that you could take that I found quite helpful. And then just making sure that you have a style where you can get out all the information, the important information that you can. Just remembering that, and also, like Tony said, just figure out what they need. Because sometimes you can spend too much time on something they don't really need, and then that can lose their kind of interest, and their tend to listen to you. So it's always best to really understand exactly what they need, but also having the ability to look out and see, maybe they don't know about this. I better bring this up, and that can also win you points, listening points too, if they're not thinking about a certain outcome or a certain possibility. Yeah, just figuring out how to get that information to them. But I know there's a lot of online resources there about communication, because really, that is the big thing now, right? Is just communicating what it's not only in the Weather Service, but a lot of other areas, is just getting that communication out, especially now more than ever with COVID, and you have to do all these online meetings instead of being right there.
And Lisa, I want to ask Lisa one more question. You brought up one very important point that I didn't even think about, is foresight. Like, we have to have this ability to look out 2, 3, 4 days ahead of time. Based upon the conversations you've had with the incident management team, you're trying to think of potential things that could cause problems down the road. And sorry to cut you off, Aviva. Lisa, could you just talk about that for like maybe a minute, and then we'll go to what Aviva had?
Well, really just that, as anybody can do, you can have such tunnel vision. You're not thinking of other possibilities that may blindside you. So really, as the weather expert that you're brought into, you kind of need to really listen to what their plan is, what their tactics are, so you understand, so that you can look at the forecast coming in and be like, oh wait, they're going to do that burnout on this, the eastern side over here. Well, that we have this weather system that may come in the next couple days, So a lot of it is just listening and soaking in all the information that you can get, so that you can look at your forecast and see what would be most impactful to them, and get that to them in an understandable way and in a timely way.
Absolutely. Aviva, sorry to cut you off there.
No, that was a really good question. So I'm glad you asked that, because listening is like everything. Embedding yourself within operations and hearing what their plans are, so that you can speak to the things that they need that they don't really know that they need. until you say it out loud. But the one thing I was going to add is, in terms of communication, is leaving the jargon at home. Like, one of the things that we really learn and train in the incident meteorology program is leaving behind, dry line and CAPE and LI and all the different meteorological terms that we all know, but they don't know. But speaking in the way that they understand and learning their jargon, that'll also gain you trust. But if you don't know their language, just speaking plainly is super key and something that you can use across the board with any partner.
Absolutely. And I'm going to touch on that a little bit more broadly, and I'll kind of put on my professor hat here for just a second. I think it's really important to be honest with yourself and recognize your strengths and your weaknesses. And if a certain type of communication, maybe like talking in front of the public, isn't your strength, be honest with yourself so that you can learn to improve that skill. If you glaze over it and you're not honest with yourself, you may never get to a point where you're improving that skill, or you may never find a mentor that's going to help you to improve that skill. And so just be honest with yourself about your weaknesses. And if you find a weakness in whatever, if it's communication related or anything else, bring that to the forefront of your brain and do your best to get better at it.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what other people have said, that finding a good style is the way to go. That makes you more comfortable in how you're presenting things. I trained a lot of people when I was working with the Weather Service, and by far, meteorologists are the biggest introverts I think I've ever come across in my life. And when these people are, part of their training is to get up and do the briefings or talk to the operations people, and they just freeze up, or they do all other kind of things. Like I had one guy that put the microphone up in front of his face, and we started calling him rock star because it was like he was singing in front of a rock band with his microphone. Some of the things you could do too is, like, even with the weather service programs, there's a thing called Toastmasters that I've had people go through, and if you're going to take the class, I don't know if they force you, but they push you you do a speech every week practically through that whole time you're in there, and the crowds progressively get bigger and bigger, because that first time you're standing up in 1,000 sets of eyes staring you back at you, it's quite frightening, and I still get butterflies after 24 years. So practice. Yeah.
That's a great point. And there are a lot of different community organizations that might help you along the way, whether it be a Rotary Club, Toastmasters, an Optimist Club, etc. So let's move on to the next question. This comes from Jacob. He is a meteorology student at Ohio University. When you are forecasting for wildfire management, how would you forecast and communicate about storms with a lot of lightning? Also, does positive lightning account for the majority of lightning-based concern? And let's have Aviva start with this one, but all I'm going to say is lightning is the one thing that scares the absolute out of me.
Well, okay, so thunderstorms and lightning are incredibly impactful to both aerial operations and ground operations on a fire, and to anyone really. And I wouldn't say that it's, positive lightning strikes can be stronger, but any lightning strike will hurt people and helicopters and planes. And actually, in 2020, I was on a fire where we had thunderstorms every single afternoon, like clockwork. And I actually had forecasted thunderstorms, had the timing perfectly, and there was a pilot that decided that they wanted to keep on dumping water on the southern side of the fire with thunderstorms like actively approaching. And I had called the helibase manager and told them it was coming, and then like half hour later he's like, hey, one of my pilots is still out on the southern part of the fire, and the thunderstorms were like already over the fire. And I was like, okay. I did not want to. My biggest fear in a fire is losing a firefighter, and knowing that I could do something. I want to make sure that I can get everybody home. That is my ultimate goal. Get everybody home safely. And so I literally, for the next, I think it was like 2 or 3 hours, maybe 4, I spent it on the phone actively communicating with this pilot to make sure that they went around to the southern side of the fire and wrapped around the backside of the thunderstorms and landed safely. And the minute that helibase manager called me and told me that they had landed safely, I just, like, the sigh of relief I had. Thunderstorms are very impactful, to say the least.
And just to address your positive lightning account for the majority of lightning-based concern, all lightning will cause fires. Positive lightning tends to have longer continuing current, so there's probably a higher likelihood that it'll cause a fire, but all lightning will cause fire. And Tony, what do you do to communicate about storms with a lot of lightning, not only to aerial resources, but to ground resources as well?
Yeah, I think that's one of the, as Aviva mentioned, it can really be a real stressful portion of the deployment too. When you have convection widespread all day, you're keeping an eye on the radar. We do make calls out on radio to the boots on the ground to give them heads up that there is not just storms in the area, but anything that could, like an outflow or outflows from thunderstorms, are incredibly dangerous. It could switch the flaming front direction real rapidly and spread the fire. So keeping an eye on that is just crucial, whether you're communicating radio. A lot of teams now have, if they have cell phone access out there, which they do it sometimes, text messages, they send out group text messages as well, like a WhatsApp type communication method. But I think the radio is kind of a tried and true method to get the warning out there. And it's not just for people out in the field, it's also within the camp as well. It did have a fire where fire hit, or the thunderstorm hit the fire, column collapse, all that. And then we had a severe thunderstorm come right over us in camp, pelted us with hail, lightning as well. So you got to get the word out for not people out in the fire, but also people who are working there at the into the command post too. It is a hazard to us there as well.
Oh, that's a great point, and trying to warn people in camp, especially with nocturnal thunderstorms, about lightning is incredibly challenging. Let's go to the next question. This is from Brian. He says, hello, and oh, hi, Brian, welcome.
Hi.
You could just ask the question yourself. I'll let you ask.
Yeah, sure thing. So the question I had was, I mean, obviously with the benefit of hindsight on this one, considering that I'm going to, potentially be going, or not potentially, most likely be going down the Imet path at this point. Is there one thing in particular that you wish you would have known about either the profession or the training or just anything in general that you wish you would have known going in, maybe?
Do you like camping?
Yes.
Okay. I would say that that's the one thing that holds people back. Well, there's two big things that hold people back. One, you sleep in a tent or in your car for like 2 weeks straight. And so if you don't like camping, that could really limit whether you would enjoy the experience, and you really do need to enjoy the experience because it is an intense experience. The other part is being willing to drop everything and leave for 2 weeks.
And right after a mid shift too, right, Aviva?
I've done that. Yes. Yeah, that turnover is hard, but I mean, the adrenaline really does help, I have to say. It carries you through.
And coffee.
Yes.
Coffee.
Lots of coffee. As the Imet, you're generally the first person up in the morning because you want to review your forecast before you go to your 0600 briefing, and so you're always the first one making coffee. You want to add that extra scoop of grounds.
Yeah.
Always just go with the extra scoop.
Yes.
But yeah, just knowing that it's a real intense experience, but at the same time, oh my gosh, it's so rewarding. It really makes your sense of worth of being a meteorologist, because at the weather service you put out a forecast and you're like, someone's looking at it, I guess. I don't know why, but here you go. You don't get that. You just get a real sense of purpose when you're out as an Imet. Your forecast matters. You get the feedback, positive and negative. It's just real intense. Like Aviva said, it's just, you're sleeping on the ground. You are constantly bombarded by questions. You have all these meetings to attend. You're being pulled in like 10 different ways all the time.
Yep.
There's a lot expected of you. So it's just, you are very burnt out after an experience, but you love it. If it's for you, that like you will thrive off of that.
Awesome.
Wouldn't change it for the world.
And always carry a notebook and a pen with you wherever you go. It doesn't matter if you're headed to the porta potty. Somebody will stop you on the way and ask you a question. And you want to have the ability to write that down and answer them at a later time. Looking through the questions. Thanks, Brian. I appreciate your question.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
This one's, it's more of a comment from Maddie. Hi, Maddie. Maddie was an intern of mine last summer, and I got wrapped in with the Rocky Mountain Blue team as a technical specialist, just kind of helping out doing a lot of this, organizing Zoom meetings and doing all of the weird COVID stuff we have to do with incident management. And she says that she can, in fact, attest to the point you got to sleep in your tent or a car for up to 14 days, but the best experience she could have ever gotten. So I'm glad the Rocky Mountain Blue team was accommodating to you. So I don't see any other questions. I guess, is there anything else our Imet panel wants to bring up or address, or anything that you think we've missed that might be beneficial for the good of the order?
I guess the one piece of advice that I got at my first fire that I still carry with me is the relationships you have already developed, the people you rely on day to day, don't forget them. Yeah, have your husband wake up at 4 in the morning, or, you know, whoever your partner is, wake up at 4 in the morning to say hi to you in the morning and talk about things. I mean, it makes a world of difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good one. Take care of your family. You know, so if you're a guy, send your spouse flowers, talk to your kids, send them gifts. You know, they'll remember you. You know, with you, Aviva, as you get a fly rod, you go fly fishing.
No, my husband just got gifted one though by my father-in-law.
Nice. Yeah, take care of your family even when you're gone. Goes a long way.
I guess we do have one last question floating in. Gordon asks, I didn't catch the difference between a type 1 and a type 2 team. Maybe I'll just quickly address this. So everything in the wildfire world is typed by size, typed by capabilities. And so if you think about fire engines, if you look at a giant fire engine with a ladder truck, that'd be like a type 1 fire engine. And a type 6 fire engine is maybe an F350 chassis with a 150-gallon water tank on the back of it. So there's this spectrum of fire engines. And it's the same thing with incident management teams. There's a spectrum of incident management teams. Generally, the organized ones are the type 3, type 2, and type 1 teams. The type 1 teams are going to manage the most complex incidents. And it's not necessarily by size. It can just be purely by complexity. Maybe there's a huge wildland urban interface. Maybe there's a lot of gas wells. Maybe it could be whatever, just a very complex incident. Type 2 is at this point in time virtually a type 1 team, but maybe just trained in slightly less complex types of incidents. But nationally, they're looking at kind of blending the type 1 and type 2 models. And type 3 teams are more of a size, and let's say a type 2 team might have 70 people, a type 1 team might have 130 people on it, a type 3 team might have 15 people on it and addressing maybe like a localized flood, or maybe a train derailment, or, you know, a 600-acre fire on the north side of a town or something like that. And you guys have anything else to add about typing of incidents?
No, you're right on the money, Darren. It's all about complexity, and they go through those analysis several times a week. And when things are starting to get big, you know, they might transition. They might originally put a type 2 on, and then as the complexity gets bigger, they'll transition to a type 1, or even back from a 1 to a 2. All that gets thrown out of the window in a big year. 2015, we had a lot of fires in the Pacific Northwest, and there was a lot of type 2 teams doing type 1 complexity fires. And there's the same thing that's going on the last 2 years, 2020, 2021, big fire years. And those are starting to blur a little bit, like you were saying, Darren.
Absolutely. And actually, I think Tyler brings up one last question, and maybe this is a great way to wrap up our conversation. She has a blog. One thing I can say on my blog about IMETs that is appropriate, I am happy not sharing anything, but I guess as a kind of a closing note, what would you guys say would be the one thing someone could add to a blog regarding the IMETs and IMET programs? I'll open up to whomever.
Dedication to mission. Like this is like Lisa said, this is probably the most rewarding aspect of my career at this point. Really love it. You get to see what your forecast does in action. You get to work with people directly. The IMET program really is where it's at, and understanding the needs of your partners and really affecting something. It really does feel like you go home and you know you made a difference.
Yeah, I think Aviva hit it right in the head too with the dedication of the IMET program. If you're not familiar with it, it's a volunteer program within the Weather Service, so no one is required to do it. And so, that means the people who are there, even though it can be kind of some grueling work conditions, want to be there and are really in love with the mission and the service that it provides too. So it's just a great community to be involved with too, not getting into the program, which is, one of the things that really is, kind of makes it feel like a family organization.
Well, all right, I guess we'll wrap this up. I appreciate you attending. Again, this was sponsored by the American Meteorological Society's Board for Operational Government Meteorologists. We're just striving to kind of forward the mission of those meteorologists that work kind of in the government sphere. And so thanks for joining us. If you have any other questions, you can feel free to reach out to the BOGM board. Again, that's Board of Operational Government Meteorologists. You can Google that online, and I think my contact info is on there. And I just appreciate our panelists. I thought that was a wonderful discussion. So let's maybe take a breather this winter, and we'll get back to it hopefully early next summer and not later this spring.